welcome to today's Digital Doc series here at Aligned Modern Health. So thank you so much for being here today, and welcome to both new and returning clients and patients. So today's Digital Doc series is going to be focusing on balancing flavors when cooking at home. So I'm Sarah Elster. I'm one of the registered dietitians here working at Aligned. If you're new to Aligned, here are just a couple things to get us started with learning a little bit more about that. So at Aligned, we focus on an integrative medicine approach. And so what that means is that we're really looking to get to the root cause by looking at the whole person versus one symptom or condition. So a couple 4 areas that we focus on here are chiropractic medicine. We also look at acupuncture, clinical massage therapy, as well as functional medicine and clinical nutrition. So all of these different areas are going to help to really treat different areas of overall like mind and body. And so we can focus on anything from like musculoskeletal pain to arthritis, pregnancy pain, working on acupuncture with like stress and anxiety relief. Also things like muscle soreness, headaches, soft tissue injury, and then also for like the clinical nutrition and functional medicine side, we focus a lot on gastrointestinal, autoimmune disorders, bloating, constipation, fatigue, food sensitivities, weight management, and nutritional counseling. So a little bit about me. I have been with Align for about 1.5 years. Some of my clinical passions include optimizing fertility. I work a lot with hormone balance patients, cardiometabolic conditions, gastrointestinal disordered, autoimmune, and then just basic chronic disease prevention. So how can we prevent things from happening in the future? I did my nutrition education at Dominican University, and then did my dietetic internship through University of Chicago Medicine at Ingalls Memorial Hospital in Harvey. I'm certified in the low FODMAP diet from Monash University, as well as I have a certification from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics in integrative and functional nutrition. So let's get started with a couple of our objectives today. So our first objective will be for you all to be able to identify and understand the 5 spices. We will also be able to select specific foods, herbs, and spices that may pair well together and create bold flavors for meals. We also will help you to choose foods that might help build, balance, or even correct meals as well with some great flavor and taste. All right, so taste. Great to define it. So let's start off with that. So the sensation produced when a substance in the mouth chemically reacts with taste bud receptors is the definition of taste. In your front of your tongue alone, you have over 5,000 taste buds. And within each of those taste buds, you have 50 to 100 different receptors for a total of anywhere between 250 to 500 taste bud receptors per tongue. So that is a lot of surface area, a lot of ways that you can kind of experience and taste flavor. So the other interesting part is that taste has evolved over time. And so back in the day, it was very important for helping to protect us from poisonous foods because it would have a bad taste. It also helped us to ensure that we had enough calorie intake. So it ensured that foods were interesting and satisfying for us. Also good to know too is that taste is different from flavor. So flavor can incorporate taste, smell, texture, and temperature. So it really rounds out the full experience of something that is flavorful. So let's get into the 5 different tastes. And so that's going to be sweet, bitter, salty, sour, and umami. And so if we start off first with sweet, sweet is going to be the most pleasurable of all the tastes. And so we enjoy sweetness because historically something being sweet meant that it was safe for us to eat. And so that'll be foods like sweet potatoes and carrots, different types of fruits, dried fruits, also things like caramelized onions. So that's also wonderful in getting a sweetness and a richness. You can also get a sugary or a sweet taste from something like maple syrup, honey, molasses, brown or white sugar. Next, you have bitter. So bitter is the most sensitive of all the tastes. And so bitter is often perceived also as a sharp taste on the tongue. So that might be arugula, Swiss chard, kale. Also examples would be like a unsweetened cocoa, hops, as well as like coffee or olives. Another example too is if you've ever tried chicory or dandelion leaves. Those can also leave a little bit of a bitter flavor. Cabbage is also a great example. Next is your salty. So salty is the most enhancing of all the tastes. And so a salty taste is produced because of sodium ions, and many foods that are full of sodium for food preservation as well as flavor enhancement. And so think of like your pickled or fermented vegetables, processed meats, different things like cured meats, and then even some of your like pretzels and popcorn and different types of meats and seafood. Next, you have sour, and so sour is the most lip puckering of all the tastes. And so sour is actually the opposite of bitter. And so when you think of bitter, thinking of like the cabbage or the cocoa or the hops, sour is actually more of your Greek yogurt or your vinegars or different types of like lemon, lime, and orange as well. And then you have the umami flavor. And so this is the newest of all the flavors and tastes. And so often it's the hardest to describe. So some people will consider it more of like an earthy flavor or something like savory or meaty. So some examples of that would be mushrooms, truffles, tomato paste, hard or aged cheeses, soy sauce or coconut aminos, miso, anchovies, or fermented foods can also have a little bit of an umami taste. Next, you have the combination of all these things together. And so, like I mentioned earlier, taste is only one piece of the flavor profile. So you've got your tastes, which are sour, salty, bitter, sweet, and umami. And then you also have the other three components that include texture, spiciness, and temperature. So texture is also known as mouthfeel, and this is the element in the sensory experience of the food in your mouth. And so this can range from anything like crunchy to salty, or I'm sorry, silky, or a little bit of a like gritty taste or smooth. You can taste the difference there between different textures. Temperature, that's also important for affecting the flavor of a dish. And so it can either dull or heighten certain types of flavors, as well as it can impact the overall eating experience. And so let's say you ordered a big cheeseburger, getting that cheeseburger cold is going to impact that eating experience. Eating those foods warmer helps to enhance the flavor, enhance the taste. The last component too is the spiciness. And so this is the degree to which capsaicin, piperine, or other spicy elements are detectable in the food. So like salt and sugar, spicy ingredients are used to enhance flavor. And so the degree of spiciness is definitely based on your personal preference level. So all these things combined together equal the flavor and the enticingness of the dish. All right, so then moving on to the second section here is how to build, balance, and even potentially correct certain flavors. So let's start off with some combinations for beginners. And so just so you know, you don't have to frantically write any of these down. You'll get these slides after the video as well. But these are some tried and true flavor combinations. So one of the first ones here is basil, oregano, garlic, onion, and lemon. So thinking of your chicken or poultry dishes, anything that you might be like braising or slow roasting. Cilantro, lime, cumin, ginger, and soy sauce. That also brings both a bright flavor with the cilantro and lime and the ginger, plus a little bit of the umami with the soy sauce. And then you've also got rosemary, sage, and thyme. So think like Thanksgiving dinner or big roasts or holidays. Really important for helping to give a good base or a boost to like soups, stews, and stocks as well. And then next you have your Dijon mustard mixed with balsamic vinegar and garlic as well. And so that would be a great option for a dressing or a marinade. Those are really great options for adding a lot of bright flavor to that meal. There's paprika, garlic, and chili as well. So that brings out a really good like smoked or richness to a dish. And then next you have a great umami flavor combination. So you have some brightness with the chives, the sesame oil, plus you have the umami flavor with the soy sauce and the mushrooms. Finally, you have capers, parsley, mint, and lemon. So this is another great combination if you're looking for some bright with a little bit of a saltiness to it as well. That can be really great for fish or different types of like grains, also great for like soups and stews. Some other great combinations, if you're thinking of something on the sweeter side, would be mixing your allspice with things like cinnamon or nutmeg, cloves, or ginger. Another great combination is if you're wanting to pair up dill with something. Dill is very anti-inflammatory. We love to pair it up with things like caraway seeds, celery salt, onion, garlic, and parsley as well. All right. So one of the favorite parts of cooking is how to add some great flavor and taste. And so what if something's too bland? How can we add some different taste profile to that? So you can add herbs, spices, vinegar, or citrus. And so one of the first things I love to talk about is your herbs. And so those are going to be parsley, sage, mint, cilantro, things like lemongrass, basil, oregano, thyme, things like dill and bay leaves. So any of those are going to be some great flavor combinations as well. What I like to mention too is when do you add these different herbs? And so typically I recommend adding heartier herbs like your sage or your rosemary, thyme, oregano, bay leaves, all of those heartier herbs more early on in cooking. And that's because it really helps them to develop into the dish, helps them to release more flavor. It also helps to break them down a little bit, kind of soften them so it doesn't have as much of like a spiny or a prickly taste. The ones that you want to add later on are going to be your parsley, cilantro, mint, lemongrass, different things like your dill or chives. Those are all ones you want to add in so that it keeps its fresh, bright green color. Also helps so that it keeps it a little bit more of a fresher flavor in the dish as well, keeps it brighter. Next are your spices. And so that's going to be anything from ginger to garlic, turmeric, paprika, mustard, sumac, pepper, cinnamon, cumin, and nutmeg. One thing that I also like to talk, I get a lot of questions about this, is when to add pepper. So pepper is great for a couple reasons. It can be a little bit more of a like blending in with the dish, or you can make pepper very forward with giving it a lot of bite. And so if you're wanting the pepper to have a little bit more of an integrative flavor, I would recommend adding it in earlier in cooking versus later. And so if you want to have that more of a pepper bite, especially if you're doing like a meat sear or anything where you're kind of cooking that taste up, you want to add that pepper later on for a little bit more of a bite. The other components here are going to be your vinegar and citrus. And so vinegars like apple cider vinegar, balsamic, red wine, white wine, any of those things are going to be great combinations for sauces and dressings and different types of marinades as well. So I highly recommend adding those things in to help to add some rich flavor. And then also same thing with your citrus. You can add those in like lemon and lime to a marinade, or if you want to squeeze that onto a piece of salmon just before serving. You can add oranges and grapefruits, pomelos to salads. Those are great additions for adding some good brightness. The last component here is the umami ingredient. So that umami ingredient can add that earthiness or that roundness to an otherwise flat dish. Next, you have your sweet. And so this is going to be a little bit more of how we balance flavors or potentially correct. So starting off with sweet, What if something's too sweet? We want to add some acid to it, like a vinegar or a citrus. You can also add a little bit extra of some spices, or you can add a healthy fat. That helps to balance it out with something like some olive oil, avocado, or yogurt. The other thing you could always do would be to dilute the recipe with more liquid. But what if something's not sweet enough? What I love to recommend is don't always go straight for the table sugar. Try adding instead something like agave nectar, berries, tomatoes, carrots, molasses. You can also try maple syrup or some nut butter. Another fun fact too is that the colder a dish is, the less sweet it will taste. And so sometimes chefs will recommend leaving a dessert out for, 5 minutes before serving, just to kind of bring it down a little bit more to room temperature or a little bit above. One final component too about this sweetness is adding in those caramelized onions. And so those are going to be really great for adding a richness to foods that can help to add some roundness to a stock, or like if you made like a dark sauce that's going to go over with like a gravy, anything like that, those caramelized onions are perfect. So the next, bitter flavors. So bitter ingredients in general are very cooling. They can help stimulate the appetite. So think of like digestifs or an aperitif. They also help to promote other tastes. They help to relieve thirst as well. These bitter ingredients can also help to create a sense of lightness in a dish. It can also balance sweetness, cut richness, and typically we recommend having bitter flavors as more of a background flavor. So instead of making it the main component of the dish, aiming for it being a background flavor. So let's say it's a salad and you want to add some chopped cabbage. Like that's a great addition for a little bit of a bitterness, but it's not the full forward taste of the meal. But what if something happens to be too bitter? That's where we can add in a sour component. So adding in a little bit of vinegar or citrus. So thinking of like a coleslaw, that helps to kind of cut some bitterness of a cabbage. Something sweet, so mixing some of your bitter ingredients with carrots, corn, or sweet potatoes. And you can also add in a warming spice, so something like cinnamon or nutmeg. And opposite of your sweetness, the warmer a dish is, the less bitter it will taste. And so think of like if you had cabbage raw versus cabbage cooked, it's going to bring out a little bit more of a sweetness, have a little bit less of that bitter taste. All right, next is salty. So what if something's too salty? We recommend if it's something like a soup or a stew, you can dilute it with more water or an unsalted stock base. If it's adding in a little bit something like potatoes or a winter squash, beans, any of those things will help to kind of absorb some extra salt. You can add more of the other ingredients. So if you want to add in some more veggies or a protein. The other thing you can also do too is get a little bit of an acid in there. So something like the vinegar or the citrus. I usually like to recommend adding like a drop of lemon juice to something like a soup or a stew or anything like that that might be a little bit too salty. Like salt, acid compounds compete with bitter flavors. And so that helps to reduce our perception of them as ways of brightening that dish. And so typically what we recommend is just adding in something like, a teaspoon or an eighth of a teaspoon of something like the citrus. Taste as you cook as well. It's very important. A little salt goes a long way. And so other ways that you can add in saltiness without having to add table salt would be adding a touch of soy sauce, or doing a little bit of seaweed or olives, capers, smoked paprika. Anything like that can add a very similar taste without having to necessarily load it with salt. The other component too when cooking is when to add salt when you're searing meats or cooking different types of meat. So I usually recommend kosher salt versus table salt when you're doing the seasoning prior to searing. And that is because kosher salt has a higher grain versus table salt. And so that really helps to distribute it more easily and cling better to the meat. So next we have sour. And so sour can bring a brightness to a dish. It can also help to balance sweetness, cut bitterness, and it can also help to sharpen other flavors around them. And what's important too to note about sour taste is that there are some foods that are meant to be sour and then other foods that have gone sour. And so think of those items more as like your milk or your juice or potentially some ingredients that you cooked and it's been a couple days past its expiration. So those should absolutely still be avoided, but foods like your vinegars and your Greek yogurt, things like that, or citrus, those things are meant to be sour. But what if something's too sour? That's when we recommend trying to add a sweet component of it, like the caramelized onions, or if you do carrots, tomatoes, anything like that is a great sweet component. You can also try introducing umami taste through the mushrooms, soy sauce, or hard cheeses. All right, so then you have your umami. And so here are some creative ways to add that in. So we talked a little bit about things like adding miso or tomato paste to soups, sauces, or stews. You could add a splash of Worcestershire sauce. You can also add some like shiitake mushroom powder or a mushroom salt to anything like meat, seafood, or vegetable dishes to give it that boost. One of my favorite chef's tips too is adding minced mushrooms. So that can offer a same mouthfeel as ground meat. So one of my favorite ideas is adding in some minced mushrooms to something that you want to expand. So like let's say you wanted to make a like a vegetable chili and you only have a pound of turkey meat. Adding in some minced mushroom to that can really help to support with like adding some volume to that dish. Plus, it's a great way of adding in another serving of veggies, and it gives a really, really great umami taste to that dish as well. Common pantry staples too, like your coconut aminos or the soy sauce. All of those things contain high levels of those glutamates, and that is what that flavor is. And so try mixing a teaspoon or two of soy sauce into a chili, or chop up some finely minced sardines and add that to a chicken braise. All right, so then the last component here is spiciness. So while this isn't a main taste profile, it's also important for the dish as well. So a little spiciness goes a long way. If a dish needs it, try adding a little bit of chili powder, some chopped jalapenos, some cayenne powder, or pepper, red pepper paste. Just be sure to taste test along the way so that you know your spiciness level. But what if something's too spicy? That's where we can kind of balance that with some sweetness, like a tad of honey or molasses or some maple syrup. You can also balance spiciness with some cooling ingredients like coconut milk, mayo, or even a little bit of, some avocado or some sour cream or yogurt to that dish on the side. That can help to balance out that flavor. All right, so some of our final thoughts, and these will be a little bit more on the cooking side. And so when sauteing or searing, a great way to add a lot of flavor is to add the brown stuff at the bottom of the pan called the fond. The fond is very flavorful and should be utilized as long as it's not totally like burnt on. That would be an example of one that I would probably try to get rid of a little bit. But if it's a nice brown color, you can deglaze the pan by adding a little bit of vinegar or stock or tomato sauce, and that will help to lift it up and incorporate it into the dish. Another fun thought is if you're hesitant to start cooking with some unfamiliar herbs and spices, first choose one. So like, let's say it's adding in sumac, or you want to try adding in dill or chives. Try to find a recipe that will showcase that. And we can help you out here too at Align. Like we can help to start to explore some of those different flavor profiles for you as well. Doing so will help you to experience more of these taste flavors and help to grow your palate over time. Other things that I always like to mention too are how to roast veggies and meats. And so we usually recommend a little bit of a higher cooking temperature for those. You definitely want to utilize a high heat oil, such as avocado oil. So that would be a great option for that. And then adding in a little bit of those herbs and spices to it while it's cooking. So some of those like tougher herbs. So like the oregano, the rosemary, thyme, sage, all those great ones. That's great to add in earlier in the cooking process. The other component too is how you can add a big boost of flavor with small ingredients. And so that's even like some horseradish or some pomegranate seeds. You can add in mustard or chutney. Other flavors are going to be like your beans or wasabi. You can also add in olive tapenades or salsa with different spiciness levels. All of those things can add in a really great flavor profile to your dish. Finally, I love offering experimenting with different cuisines and foods from different cultures. That really does help you to experience some new flavor combinations and always helps to investigate the origin story behind it as well. So getting some new information on why these cultures are implementing these different flavors as well. All right, so that brings us to the conclusion here of our presentation with the slides. And so thank you so much for joining us. Please enter any questions in the Q&A feature now. If you're interested in scheduling a free 15-minute consultation with the functional medicine or the clinical nutrition team, you can definitely do so by calling the number listed here, as well as visiting us online at alignedmodernhealth.com. So I'm just going to pull up my Q&A here. So you guys offered up some really great questions. And so I'll go down the list here. So can you recommend any best anti-inflammatory spices? Yes. So a lot of the ones that I mentioned there, like ginger, turmeric, dill, oregano, any of your garlic and onion is going to have really great anti-inflammatory properties. Also too, cinnamon and nutmeg, pepper, all of your like cayenne, anything like that is going to combine to make a really great anti-inflammatory punch in the body. And then I have another great question here. What is sumac? So sumac is more of is found typically in like Arabic or Lebanese cooking. And so typically it pairs really well with za'atar spices. So you'll see that mixed in with different dishes or like mixed into breadcrumbs. It's a little bit of a tart or a lemony kind of flavor to the dish. And then next one, this is a great one. So when do spices expire? So when's the best time to kind of like sort through and take a look at your pantry staples there? I like to recommend around 6-ish months is when they start to potentially lose a little bit of their flavor and their freshness. They don't necessarily expire at that point, but they can start to lose freshness. So kind of consuming within that 6-month time frame is perfect. Otherwise, you can always certainly go up to a year. And then what foods have natural probiotic qualities? And so that's a great question as well. So we talked a little bit about like the fermented and pickled vegetables. So those are going to be a great source of natural probiotics. Also are going to be things like your Greek yogurt. That's going to contain some natural probiotic strains as well. These are all such great questions. So let's see, what about the minced mushrooms? And so what type of mushroom can I start with? And so what I'll typically recommend is a little bit of a milder mushroom. So you can add in something like your oyster mushrooms, baby bella, you can add button mushrooms in. Those would be a couple to get started with. And then you can always play around with things in the future like truffle or different types of your mushrooms that are more like wild grown. Any of those things will bring about a new flavor profile. The ones that I mentioned earlier are going to be the ones that blend really nicely into a dish and kind of incorporate more of those flavors. All right, so another great question here is, are all the spices you mentioned dried spices? So no, you can actually add spices in that are both fresh and dried. And so you've got ginger, so you can do dried ginger or fresh ginger. And another great question I saw there too was like when to use whole versus ground. And so that depends on the dish. If you need something that has a very like bright flavor and needs it to be a little bit more forward, I would recommend using fresh. And then ones that you're trying to add in and incorporate, do that more on the ground side. And then another great question here too, are all herbs and spices gluten-free? So that's a great question. Typically, we'll recommend checking the packaging. Not necessarily all herbs and spices that are found in like spice blends might not be necessarily gluten free, but if you're getting something that just says cinnamon or it just says ground ginger or just basil, that is going to be definitely gluten free. Just check if it's a spice blend or in one of those spice packets, because that can certainly sometimes add in some like natural flavors that could potentially have malt or malt seasoning in it, which can be a gluten containing product. All right. So one of the final questions here too is, do you have any cookbook recommendations? So I absolutely love a couple of my favorites here are going to be, there's one called the Anti-Inflammatory Cookbook, and that's from a dietitian out in Seattle. Her name's Ginger Holton. Another one of my favorites is the Love and Lemons Cookbook. That one's also fantastic. One of my favorites for incorporating more plant-forward meals and adding in new herbs and spices. Another one that I really love is the like Skinny Taste cookbooks. Those are fantastic. That cookbook involves a lot of great like seasonal recipes and things like that as well that can help to bring in new and fresh herbs and spices. All right, so those are some of our great questions. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure just getting to interact and be able to talk with you guys more about balancing flavors and spices. So we look forward to seeing you next time at the next Digital Doc series. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.